God reaches out and grasps your heart and your mind, recaptures your imagination, and you see the perfect wisdom and the truth, capital T truth, of this little boy asleep in a cattle trough.
Merry Christmas and welcome to this week's edition of First Person. I'm Wayne Shepherd. I'm very pleased to have my friend Michael Card join me in conversation today about the incarnation of Jesus Christ. First Person is here every week at this time, and as always, you can go online to learn more about our guests. For instance, at firstpersoninterview.com this week, you'll find a link to Michael's music and teaching ministry. As a matter of fact, as we near the end of the year, you may want to scroll back through our many guests and listen to any of our past interviews. Just go to firstpersoninterview.com. Well, when the calendar showed this would be our Christmas program, producer Joe Carlson recommended that our mutual friend Mike Card join me to talk about Jesus. Well, Michael, as you know, First Person is usually a person's faith story and God's call on their life, but at Christmas time, I thought it would be appropriate for us to talk about Jesus and the life of Jesus, starting with the incarnation. So thank you for this opportunity.
There's no one I would rather talk about. You know that, Wayne.
I know that. You spent a lot of time in the Gospels your whole life, but in particular these last few years, as you've written these books about Luke and Mark and Matthew and so on. So let's talk about Jesus today.
Sure. Well, if for a roadmap, I mean, if we're going to work through the Gospels and the Nativity, we start with John 1, where we have the incarnation. John doesn't give us the Nativity. He knows we know those passages from the synoptics. So John gives us the incarnation in chapter 1, in the next 3 or 4 verses.
Should we read them?
Yeah, why don't you read them?
Okay. John 1:1, starting there, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it."
Yeah, that's the perfect preface, isn't it, to the nativity of Jesus? This light that comes into the world, this light through whom God made the world, and the bizarre circumstance that he was not recognized by and large. But I think what's unique about both Matthew and Luke, they tell us about two groups, the shepherds in Luke and the wise men in Matthew, who actually do experience, some revelation, and they have some idea of who this little baby is.
Mm-hmm. Well, this phrase "in the beginning," I mean, that's literally in the beginning. That goes way back.
Sure. I mean, it echoes the opening statement of Genesis is, Bereshith, in the beginning. So I think John is aware that he's the other end of the bookend of the Holy Scriptures. We begin with a story, of creation, and then sort of the climax is when this person who we know as Jesus, through whom God created all things, comes into the world. And then again, the disconnect there, that even though he created the world. The creation didn't recognize him. And that's very consistent, isn't it, with Luke? I mean, it's a perfect connection over to Luke and the story of this little impoverished baby, who sleeps wrapped up in rags and is lying in a cattle trough.
It just impresses me, even as I hear myself read those verses, that if this is all we had, that would be enough, wouldn't it?
I think so. I mean, I think that what's unique about John is he has been preaching and teaching the content of his gospel for 60 or 70 years. I mean, he's a very old man, perhaps even 100 years old when he writes. And unlike Mark, who is a relatively young man and who is taking down the story from Peter, John has taught these things and thought about these things and preached them. And so I don't know, it's just so wonderfully woven together and integrated. And again, he's very aware. 92% of the Gospel of John's unique. He's very aware of the content of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and on purpose, very deliberately, supplements their stories. So if they're going to talk about shepherds and a star and wise men, and all the rest, then John is going to do all he can to fill in the story. And that's certainly what he does with the incarnation.
Yeah. Of course, we have what we need in those first verses, but later he says, this word became flesh and made his dwelling among us, and we have seen his glory. That is really the good news.
Yes, and that's what happens with the incarnation, this eternal word through whom God, the active, living word of God, through whom God created everything, has become a person, and that's what we're celebrating. This impossible event of God.
I know. And then we've got the story of John interwoven here, John the Baptist with him. And boy, what a rich passage, though, to think about at Christmas time.
Yes, and John, in the Gospel of John, one of the problems that he was dealing with in his community was that there were people that were worshiping John the Baptist as the Messiah. And so, in the opening chapters of the Gospel of John, you hear through John's own mouth repeatedly, again and again and again, he says, "I'm not the prophet. I'm not the Christ. I'm not, him." And they say, "Well, give us an answer. Who are you?" "Well, I'm just a voice crying in the wilderness."
So this was an answer to what was going on.
Yeah, John is always, all of the gospel writers are interacting with what's going on in their worlds. They've all got a context that they're writing into. Mark is writing into the context of the first persecution after the fire in Rome. Matthew, and I'm just finishing Matthew right now. Matthew is writing into the point in time right around just after 70 A.D. when the Jewish Christians are going to be kicked out of the synagogue. So they've all got their context.
Michael, we're not going to take time for your music today, unfortunately.
But that's fine.
I know that this has inspired you to write some songs. What are a couple of titles that come to mind that you've written from just what we've talked about thus far?
Well, I put this prologue to John to music, sort of a Gregorian chant, which to me was the style that felt most appropriate. Sort of a mysterious, not pretending to have the answers or to have squeezed this passage dry, but it's just, in the beginning it was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It's a wonderful chant.
Well, as we think about Jesus at Christmas, where else would you like to take us in Scripture?
Well, the next logical step is to look at Luke, and Luke has. He's very interested also in John the Baptist, by the way. Luke tells in parallel form the promise of John and the promise of Jesus, and the nativity of John, and then the nativity of Jesus. They're both miraculous births. John's parents are elderly, but they still have the baby the old-fashioned way, so to speak. And, but Mary's birth is a virgin birth, and so Jesus, certainly his birth is more miraculous. But, starting in chapter 2 is where Luke picks up the story. And Luke has a different point of view. We know that Luke was a companion of Paul. We know that Luke was a doctor. And from being with me, Wayne, that I'm also convinced that Luke was a slave. And because he, I think, came from a very marginalized group, he's very interested in the poverty of Jesus. Only Luke gives us, the little baby wrapped in rags, the sign that the shepherds were given, and this is something that's unusual. Sometimes people say, "Oh, swaddling clothes." Oh, in Judaism in first century, they all swaddled their babies, and so I say, no, that's not it at all. It's something out of the ordinary. It's a sign. There are no other babies in Bethlehem that are wrapped up in rags and that are lying in a feeding trough. The shepherds don't seem to be put off by this at all, because, of course, they live at the level of poverty too. They are very marginalized people.
And Luke is very much in tune with those. I'm just looking as you're talking at a note in the Bible I'm using, a side note that quotes that hymn from John Wesley, "Come, thou long-expected Jesus, born to set thy people free, from our fears and sins release us. Let us find our rest in thee. Israel's strength and consolation, hope of all the earth thou art. dear desire of every nation, joy of every longing heart. And that's from Come Thou Long Expected Jesus. Wow.
Yeah, and both, even though the two events are a year and a half to 2 years apart, both the shepherds and the wise men, I think there's a reference to the fact that they're overjoyed. There's a measure of joy and amazement and excitement, which in and of itself is I think tells a lot, because it's just a baby. How many babies are there? There are babies everywhere, but this baby is unlike anything they've ever seen before. The circumstances of his birth. How many children have their birth announced by thousands of angels who illuminate the sky? And
all we have is Facebook now, but
yeah,
they had the angels.
Well, and again, this baby who is a king, who is clearly the son of David, who's born in David's town, Bethlehem. This king is still wrapped up in rags and lying in this trough, and the shepherds who are they're very much second-rate people in Israel in this day, which doesn't make sense. You would think that because David was a shepherd, they would honor shepherds, but they didn't. Shepherds were sort of looked upon almost as unclean because they were always with the sheep. They couldn't go through all of the particulars of maintaining, that sort of kosher lifestyle.
We're just getting started. We'll continue to explore the Gospels on this Christmas edition of First Person. Stay tuned. Next time on First Person, you'll hear from the director of the Urbana Student Missions Conference, Tom Lynn.
The prayer of my heart is that students would respond to this wonderful invitation from the Lord to join in on His mission. We hope for thousands of decisions of students to commit long-term to global missions.
More about InterVarsity Christian Fellowship's Urbana Student Missions Convention next time on First Person. My guest on First Person today is my friend Michael Card, and Michael has been such a good friend and wonderful Bible teacher through the years, both through his music and his teaching, that I thought it would be appropriate here at Christmas time to ask him to join us on First Person, and let's focus on the person of Jesus Christ. And Mike, I sure appreciate your help in doing that today. We left off in Luke a few moments ago. I don't know if you want to pick it up there, but I have something I want to bring up in Luke whenever it's time.
Sure, go. Yeah, you want to talk about Simeon? Go ahead.
I want to talk about Simeon because, of course, this is another passage that has inspired you to write music.
Yeah.
And I just love this story of Simeon. Maybe it's because I'm getting to be an old man now.
Yes. Yeah. No, I totally identify with you. Yeah.
A man in Jerusalem called Simeon, who was righteous and devout. He was waiting for the consolation of Israel, and the Holy Spirit was upon him. It had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not die before he had seen the Lord's Christ. And moved by the Spirit, he went into the temple courts. And when the parents brought in the child Jesus to do for him what the custom of the law required, Simeon took him in his arms and praised God, saying, "Sovereign Lord, as you have promised, you now dismiss your servant in peace. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the sight of all people, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and for glory to your people Israel." That always just grabs me.
Oh, man. Yeah, and that's his swan song, right? He knows he's going to die. Yeah. And I always thought of Simeon, Wayne, as the dividing line between the Old Testament and the New Testament, between the old orthodoxy. Luke mentions that he's a righteous man and he's a devout man. That's Judaism in a nutshell. He's the dividing line between the old orthodoxy and the new reality. And in order to demonstrate your faith in the Old Testament, you wait for God to answer His promise, right? In the New Testament, in order to show your faith, you follow Jesus. And Simeon is right on the dividing line. He'd been given this promise that he wouldn't die until he'd seen the Messiah. And then he goes into the temple courts. And the temple area was 35 acres. It was a huge area, this courtyard outside the temple. And the fact that they even found each other in and of itself is amazing. But Joseph and Mary come, and I guess the Spirit whispers to Simeon that, okay, this is the one you've been longing for. This is the one you've been waiting for. So that's the dividing line, because from now on, it's not a matter of waiting; it's a matter of following. And Simeon, and just that we have the detail that he holds Jesus in his arms, and
picture that.
Oh gosh, sings this beautiful little song. It's known as the Nunc Dimittis. Let your servant depart in peace. Let your slave depart in peace, because his identity is that of a slave.
Mm-hmm. Every new parent wants their child to be, picked up and cuddled and, fawned over, but. And here it says the child's father and mother marveled at what was said about him. It goes beyond just coddling, doesn't it?
Yeah, and well, I call Luke's the gospel of amazement. Everyone who is sort of in and around this energy field of Jesus, they are amazed, and then not only Simeon but Anna, who is another devout woman, and that shows Luke's concern for women. He only Luke tells us about Anna, and she comes, and she's part of that exchange too. I think she's part of that old world looking over into the new world. And this little baby represents that old world, that old orthodoxy. Jesus says, "I haven't come to abolish the law; I've come to fulfill it." It's a new reality, and that new reality at this point is a little, 7-day-old baby boy.
Well, we could keep going in Luke, but Matthew is very fresh on your mind because
yes.
Have you finished the Matthew book yet?
I'm editing it right now.
Take us to Matthew.
Matthew's got a different agenda, right? He's got a different situation he's dealing with. And so he has these magi. That's what's unique about his story. These men from Persia who come announcing that this king has been born. Then they've come to look for him, and of course, this is Herod's worst nightmare. We don't understand enough about Herod. We know an awful lot about Herod. He was in the last year or two of his reign. He didn't live much longer. He had, we think, stomach cancer. He had syphilis. He was just a wreck of a person. He'd already killed his sons. He'd already killed his wife. He'd already killed his mother-in-law. And his biggest fear was another king. And here come these people from the east, and that's where he was always afraid. He defended his eastern borders with all sorts of fortresses. Here come these magi, and I'm convinced, even though I have absolutely no reason to be convinced, but I'm convinced, Wayne, that they had Persian cavalry with them. This isn't three guys. This is a big entourage.
You don't strike out with just three men on camels and
no.
You're right. There had to be an entourage.
Right. Not in this day and age. And this is an official type delegation. And the other thing that always strikes me about the wise men, Wayne, is that these were men who were known to possess, all the wisdom of the world. They were familiar with the scriptures. They were familiar with all sorts of other world religions and that sort of thing. The Jews had been exiled, in Babylon, and so they had brought the scriptures with them. Daniel, actually Daniel was described as a magi, so he was part of this group, elite group. And though they had all this wisdom, it strikes me that there must have still been something that was empty or that was lacking in their understanding, and so that they would come, 2.5 years on this journey to find this little baby. And when they find him, they worship him, which to me says they found what they were looking for. They fell down and they worshiped this little baby. I mean, at this point, Jesus is a toddler and they're living in a house, but he's still just practically a little child. And these great men, it would be like the Supreme Court or something, bowing down before some little runny-nosed toddler. And it's another just amazing disconnect. I mean, we've got angels speaking to people in dreams, and we've got stars guiding people. And the wise men, unlike the shepherds who come in poverty, the wise men come and they give him gold. So it's sort of the other side, these Gentiles.
Yeah, we have both ends of the spectrum there. I like that thought a lot. I think of it in terms of everything that the world is, all the wisdom the world can accumulate comes in the form of these men and bows before this baby.
Absolutely.
That's remarkable.
They recognize in this little wordless, or maybe he's starting to talk, maybe if he's two, maybe he's starting to, babble a little bit, but they found in him all that they were looking for. I think that's the point.
Boy, that'll preach, won't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, we have time for one more incarnation time thought from Michael Card here today.
Okay. And Wayne, it strikes me that if the wise men found in Jesus this little wordless child everything that they were looking for, then those of us today who are genuinely looking, who recognize that there is this God-shaped void that, as the book of Ecclesiastes says, God has placed eternity in our hearts. There's this eternally big place. And when we become aware of that and that need, and we're looking honestly, I think Christmas is the time when we realize, this is crazy, but it's also, this is the person I've been looking for. My connectedness to God, my inability to be good enough, or to make God like me, or whatever sort of foolishness, we're caught up in. Mm-hmm. All of that is addressed in this little boy, this little infant wrapped in rags, who comes knowing that he is going to die. He's born so that he can die, and not simply die, but to die for us, so that we can have that relationship with the Father. All those things that the wise men and the shepherds and everyone else who was in this field, this area around Jesus, they all seem to have understood. Simeon, Anna, Joseph, Mary, all of them. They seem to understand and to intuit that he was all that they'd been looking for. And I think those of you that are listening, and especially those of you for whom Christmas is just a rotten time of year, and for a lot of us it is.
Yeah.
I want to tell you that he's come for you. He came so you could have a relationship with the Father. He came so that you wouldn't have to be burdened by guilt or fear or anger or loneliness. His other incarnation name is Emmanuel, God with us. He is the one who's come to be with us, and who will never leave us, and who will never forsake us. And that's what we're celebrating. That's why Christmas is this time of deep, deep joy.
It's unbelievably believable. I guess that would be one way to put it.
Yeah, it really, from one point of view, it really is crazy. And it sometimes it seems crazier and crazier the older I get. But then again, God reaches out and grasps your heart and your mind, recaptures your imagination, and you see the perfect wisdom and the truth, capital T truth, of this little boy asleep in a cattle trough.
I'm so pleased that Michael Card joined me today in conversation about Jesus. Known for his music and teaching, Mike has been a good friend for many years, and I always enjoy hearing him both sing and teach the Bible. For more about Michael Card, visit our website, firstpersoninterview.com. You'll find a link there to his website. Be sure to check into his Biblical Imagination conferences, which are held around the country, as well as his concerts. Again, go to firstpersoninterview.com for more. You'll also find us on Facebook at facebook.com/firstpersoninterview. Next week, our last program of the year, and we'll talk with Tom Lynn, the director of the Urbana Student Missions Conference, underway in St. Louis next week. Now, on behalf of my friend and producer Joe Carlson, I'm Wayne Shepherd. From our families to yours, thanks for listening today, and Merry Christmas. Join us next week for First Person.